In the national census of June 16, 1933, nearly 500,000 people living in Germany declare themselves members of the Jewish faith. On average, each of them owns one bed, almost 2 cupboards, half a commode, 3.5 chairs, 15 plates, and of course countless other items such as coats and jackets, hats and underpants, bed sheets, towels, toys, and musical instruments. Based on the total number of Jews living in Germany in 1933, this would make nearly 450,000 beds, around 900,000 cupboards, roughly 1.8 million chairs, and more than 7 million plates. What happens to all these items once the Jews flee the country, or are deported and killed? Where do they end up? Where are they now? Who profited? In the past 70 years, scarcely anyone has opened or inspected these records. Yet what's inside sheds new light on the darkest chapter in German history. 3 bedside lamps, 15 Reichsmarks. A ball lamp, 3 Reichsmarks. 1 white gold coffee set, 75 Reichsmarks. A set of earthenware crockery, 3 Reichsmarks. 1 Philips radio, 250 Reichsmarks. In Leipzig, the auctioneer Hans Clem makes scrupulous lists of every item of Jewish property sold between 1933 and 1945. Even the smallest articles are documented in meticulous detail. 1 violin, 1 set of sheet music, 1 chess set, 1 box of paints, 1 small handbag. Each item has its price. The proceeds from a single auction, the contents of one household, often stretch into thousands of Reichsmarks. For example, grand total 11,933 Reichsmarks. Clem keeps 10% of the profits. The rest flows into government coffers. Hans Clem is by no means unique. During the Nazi era, auctioneers, bailiffs, and tax officials throughout Germany are involved in the systematic confiscation and sale of Jewish property. They record their activities in minute detail. Here in Berlin, at the Federal Office for Unresolved Property Issues, several 100,000 files can still be inspected. These are not, by and large, items of great value, but rather everyday household articles. 2 small tables, 8 Reichsmarks. 1 armchair, 67 Reichsmarks. 1 gas stove, 50 Reichsmarks. Another gas stove, but a better one, 60 Reichsmarks. Various items of kitchenware, no more detail is given, but that's worth on average between 2 and 6 Reichsmarks, so quite good value. A tube, 5 Reichsmarks. It's not clear what sort of tube it is. When you look at these records, they run counter to the image of the Nazi era that we have in our heads. These are not the fanatics, the Nazis we imagined from the Kristallnacht, SA stormtroopers. Today, the sort of people we'd call skinheads, people you'd steer clear of, criminals running around smashing windows and looting. That's not what we see here. This is bureaucratic and orderly. Nazi order, perhaps, but nonetheless order. And in this sense, it's not simply arbitrary, even though it might seem so from a moral standpoint. The auctioneers, or sellers, represent one side of the equation. The buyers, the other side. We're in Bruchsal, deep in southwest Germany. This is the sideboard I was telling you about. How long has it been here? Difficult to say. I've been thinking about that too. It used to be upstairs in the living room in the 1960s. And then at some point my mother bought a new sideboard, and this one ended up down here in the cellar. And it's been here ever since. I'd guess around 40, 50 years.
40, 50 Jahre. Also ich würde einfach mal so sagen, das ist eine tradierte Erzählung in unserer Familie.
It became a kind of story passed down through our family, that this sideboard was bought at a Jewish auction. I don't think my mother ever thought about it more deeply than that. She never said, oh, it was terrible back then, or it should never happen again, or anything like that. I never heard her say that, as far as I can remember. But there again, it's more than 40 or 50 years ago.
40 Jahre her, ne? 50 Jahre. Mehr als 50 Jahre ist das her. Ne? Also ich kann mich noch erinnern.
I was looking through some old photos recently. I wanted to see if I could find any pictures of this sideboard. I didn't find anything, to be honest. But I did find a photo of my sister and me in front of a Christmas tree. We were holding our toys, smiling. And I seem to remember somehow that the sideboard was there next to us, over to the left, against the wall.
Wenn man aufs Bild guckt, links an der Wand, links.
Rather than his mother, it was Ralf Schmidt's grandmother who had once bought the sideboard at an auction. Where and when exactly, no one knows anymore.
Ich glaube, das Motiv war, boah, toll.
I think all she thought was, wow, what a smart sideboard. Let's buy it, it'll come in useful. And I don't think she ever considered it more deeply than that. Her only motive was to have a nice sideboard. One that otherwise would have been too expensive. That was the reason. But how exactly did the auctioning off of all this Jewish property take place? New information has come to light. In the city archives of Lörrach in southwest Germany, when two historians stumbled upon an unassuming box. It contained a number of unique photo negatives. Here are prints from these negatives. The citizens of Lörrach are standing in line, waiting to enter a so-called Jewish auction. It's November or early December 1940. The first thing you notice in the photos is really how many people there were. You can also see that this was most likely an exciting event for the locals. There are two young boys in the foreground who've climbed up the railings at the side, craning their necks to see what's going on. Right here, in the courtyards of the buildings where Jewish citizens had lived until only a few weeks before, their belongings are being sold off to the highest bidder. Here you can see the auctioneer standing on his podium, slightly above the others. You can see his bag, and this might be a cash box. He set up some kind of makeshift desk.
What
you gather from looking at this photo, apart from the sheer number of people, is the jolly atmosphere. In some pictures, people seem to be looking directly at the photographer. He must have drawn attention to himself somehow. Maybe he called out. And we see all these people just looking cheerfully into the camera.
Mit einer Heiterkeit tatsächlich in die Kamera.
We know that the prices people paid for these items were around a fifth less than what they would usually fetch, so we can imagine it must have been pretty attractive to purchase, say, kitchenware or furniture at these auctions, simply because it was so much cheaper. A golden opportunity for canny buyers. It makes sense, based on what we know from various studies, that the regime, by directly involving them in the theft of Jewish property, secured the loyalty of the German population. The people became accomplices, or rather they allowed themselves to become complicit in these anti-Semitic expulsions and deportations. Anyone can profit from the sudden disappearance of their neighbors. And anyone who buys the loot becomes an accessory to the crime. This profiteering from the sale of Jewish property begins as soon as the Nazis assume power. Many Jews resolve to leave the country immediately. At the time, Hans Clem's auction house in Leipzig is still a modest business earning its money from household clearances or the sale of confiscated property. This is the only known photograph of his shop, located in the Große Fleischergasse. Over to the right, we can see the Ha of Hans Clem. There are no surviving photographs of Clem himself, only the written records from his auction business. We don't know much about what kind of person he was. He was a salesman. He kept all of his accounts properly. These books are all we have to go on. Clem is entitled to 10% of the auction proceeds as commission. Between 1933 and 1936, he earns an average of 10,000 Reichsmarks per year. As the persecution of the Jews picks up, so do his profits. By 1938, when the Jewish exodus reaches its peak, his income has more than tripled. Clem advertises the auctions in the local press. The explanation is always the same: emigration. Then comes another surge in profits. Between 1939 and 1940, Clem's income doubles again, to around 50,000 Reichsmarks per year. The reason for this sudden bonanza is a new law passed by the Nazi authorities in May 1939. It decrees that Jews must be housed together in designated buildings. Large German cities in particular waste no time in implementing the new legislation. In Leipzig alone, 47 of these so-called Jewish houses are established.
Der angeordnete Umzug in ein Judenhaus.
What the compulsory relocation to a Jewish house meant was that those affected were forced to significantly downsize.
Verkleinern mussten.
Whatever they couldn't cram into their designated room or room and a half in the Jewish house had, by law, to be auctioned off.
Das mussten sie versteigern lassen. Auf Zwang.
The official reason given for the auctions is the innocent-sounding term reduction in living space. Surplus of personal property is another expression used. To all appearances, it is the Jews themselves who initiate the auctions, but they receive none of the proceeds. Clem pays the money onto a secure bank account, accessible only to the state, which then appropriates the funds. At the time, Clem is one of only 2 state-certified auctioneers operating in Leipzig.
Hans Clem
thought like a businessman. He decided to take part in this large-scale expropriation of private property, to make money from it.
Massenenteignung teilzunehmen, zu profitieren.
He decided to become a cog in the machine.
Ein Rädchen im Getriebe zu sein.
He has long been a member of the Nazi Party, and being on good terms with the right people can only benefit his business. The first deportations of Jews from German territory begin in October 1940 in the southwest of the country, in Baden and the Saar-Palatinate. For the Nazi regime, these deportations are a test designed to see how Germans will respond to this sudden disappearance of their neighbors. Bruchsal Free of Jews is the title of a film presumably commissioned by the City Fathers. Trucks are waiting, ready to transport the Jewish citizens of Bruchsal to a concentration camp in the south of France. Edmund Geckler has identified his childhood friend in the film footage, Leo Rosenberg, a boy from the neighborhood. Yes, he was the only boy. The whole deportation was shrouded in this bleak, oppressive atmosphere. The people, all Jews, were walking in an orderly fashion, quietly, some of them carrying suitcases or rucksacks or cardboard boxes in their hands. They were obedient and patient. Everything takes place in public. Many locals just stand and watch. There must have been 20 or 30 people in total, and no one says a word. No one comes to offer help, or even asks, "What are you doing with them? Why are they being taken away? Where are they going?" Nobody asked these questions. A few days later, there's an auction in Bruchsal. It is held in a pub by the name of Zum Löwen. People were coming and going, full of excitement. They were coming out with cooking pots, bed sheets, and so on. The word got out that an auction was taking place. Edmund Geckler is 6 years old at the time. His mother is Polish. The family are certainly not Nazis, yet there are all kinds of things they need. And because we were poor, we talked about buying some of these cheap items. But my mother put an end to that right away. It was out of the question, she said. It would be like picking over people's bones. It simply wasn't right. So she refused. Other people were saying, "Ah, look, you can get bargains at these auctions. We need spoons, cooking pots, cups." People were rushing to get there, desperate to buy something, even though they all knew that these things had been acquired in a bad way. There are few, if any, public protests against the initial deportations, which are now taking place across the country. Bisingen, a small town of 1,500 inhabitants close to Stuttgart, is home to a Jewish community until 1941. Freddy Kahn is the son of the only Jew from the village who survived the Holocaust. He's looking for clues to explain the past. But this is the house your father lived in? Yes, we lived here. Everything happened here in this building. And the auctions took place in front of the house, right here in the Jewish quarter. It was a convenient place for them, I suppose. Freddy Kahn's father was a cattle trader in Bisingen, but he was no longer allowed to work. It was clear where things were headed. Some had already emigrated, but now it was starting to get serious. More were bound to leave soon. And in the town, people were already starting to think, well, I wouldn't mind having that rug, or that buffet set, or lamp, and so on. Freddy Kahn's father is deported in November 1941, along with most of the Jewish community of Bisingen. 1 month later, the Kahn's belongings are auctioned off in their former home. It was announced that an auction would be held at a certain time on a certain date. So people came and waited in front of the house. And the different items, from the violin to various bits of clothing, were held out of the windows. And people started bidding for them. They can't have paid much for them, as no one had much money. Stephanie Pfeffer comes from a working-class farming family. Her father was conscripted and never returned from the war. And so my sister and my mother and I started working on the farm. It was terribly hard work and too much for us. And that's how I ruined my back. Her mother buys the violin at an auction and gives it to Stephanie. And that's how my love of music began. But I had to learn everything from scratch. The violin is the start of the young girl's musical education. I'm not sure how it will sound, but I'll give it a try. The deportation of the Jews from Leipzig begins in January 1942. This banner, which reads, "Good riddance, Jews," can be seen hanging from a railway bridge. The auctioning off of Jewish property is no longer carried out in the name of the Jews themselves. Hans Clem is now working directly for the Leipzig tax authorities and the Gestapo. Announcements in the press speak openly of non-Aryan possessions. There is no longer even an attempt to hide the truth. Herr Clem enjoys another sudden rise in profits. Compared to what he had earned in 1933, he is now earning more than 10 times as much. In today's money, his income would be equivalent to around 500,000 euros. Instead of selling the contents of each household separately, as he has done before, Hans Clem now holds bulk auctions. The first transport, carrying 559 people, leaves Leipzig on the 21st of January 1942. Just 3 weeks later, their possessions are sold at auction. On the 10th of May, 287 people, many of them parents with their children, are sent from Leipzig to the extermination camps. They must leave everything, even their suitcases, behind.
Die Koffer.
The suitcases and bags were loaded, supposedly, onto another carriage, and the deportees were told that it would be sent on to them.
Den Deportierten wurde vorgegaukelt, dass ihr Gepäck nachgesendet wurde.
But everything stayed behind in Leipzig.
Gepäck in Leipzig verblieben.
Just one day after the deportations, the tax officers instruct Hans Clem to collect and store the luggage. On 3 consecutive days, the items are to be sorted, valued, and sold. They include 118 suitcases, a lady's handbag, and a rucksack.
2 Kindermäntel.
2 children's coats, 2 pairs of children's trousers, 6 small aprons. Even a suitcase belonging to 3-year-old Peter Bartfeld is offered for sale.
12 kleine Kinder.
12 small children's cardigans, partially damaged and moth-eaten.
Kleine Höschen.
12 small pairs of trousers, aprons and shirts.
Taschentücher.
6 handkerchiefs, 1 flannel, 6 pairs of children's stockings, 3 single stockings, 2 hoods, some yarn. The winning bidder pays 70 Reichsmarks for the lot.
Was hier
A mother of a small child had carefully packed all these items for their journey into the unknown, and they were bought up by a needy fellow citizen, possibly to be sold on. We don't know for sure.
ersteigert.
Hans Clem's auctions always take place a few days after the item's owners have been deported. On the 13th of July 1942, 170 more people disappear. Their belongings are sold on the 27th of July. The deportation of mid-September 1942 is followed by an auction on the 20th of October. The belongings of those sent to their deaths in February 1943 are sold to the public on the 14th and 15th of March. And so it continues. For a long time, the German people are not noticeably affected by the war. But in 1941, the Allies begin the bombing of German cities. The sheer scale of the destruction means that many Germans find themselves in dire need of furniture and household items. In this footage from German cities, we can see the streets filled with furniture quickly rescued from the burning buildings. Yet most of it is now unusable. Between the 24th and the 27th of April 1942, most of the densely built historical center of Rostock is destroyed. 35,000 people are made homeless. There is a desperate need for both accommodation and furniture. That is the ideological problem faced by the German people at the time. They're suffering crushing defeats, losing their homes, they're cowering in their basements, their buildings are on fire, and their furniture has been destroyed, and it all has to be replaced somehow. But the replacements come from their sworn enemies, their Jewish enemies. The deportation order issued in July 1942 applies to all of northern Germany. In Parchim, 3 Jewish men, women, and children received the expulsion order. In Stavenhagen, 8 people are notified, along with a woman from Ribnitz. Across the state of Mecklenburg, more than 90 Jews are to be deported on a single train. Two weeks later, in Schwerin, at Schmiedestrasse 15, today the site of a cafe, the Lippers family home is cleared out. The timber merchants hired to clear the apartment submit an invoice for 2 men, 8 hours work each. The janitor, a man called Frank, bills 2 hours of overtime for his help with the clearance. 1 mark and 98 pfennigs. The removals company Autofuhrbetrieb L. Koger also earn their cut. They calculate 41 marks and 40 pfennigs for the transportation of furniture. The furniture seized from Schwerin's deported Jews is stored in this building near the Pfaffenteich, once home to the local tax authorities. It is then sold at auction on 2 consecutive days. Max Kuhlmann is the electrician charged with lighting the auction hall. Local art dealer Theodor Michaelsen is chosen as auctioneer. Advertising in the local newspaper, Michaelsen describes it as a voluntary auction of Jewish property. The Lippers' belongings alone generate 1,701 marks and 20 pfennigs. The sum is transferred to the National Treasury. In Rostock, Jewish property is collected and stored at the Friedrich Franz Girls' School. Today, the building is part of the Music and Theatre Academy. Here, once again, the auction is advertised in the local press. The youngest deportee is a 4-year-old girl, Ossie Steinfeld. Her possessions are also sold at auction. Whether it was her toys or her clothes is not exactly clear. According to the auctioneer's records, her belongings generate 10 Reichsmarks profit. The auctioneer pockets 50 pfennigs as commission. Items belonging to Paula Moses from Ribnitz are sold for 732 Reichsmarks and 39 pfennigs. In Stavenhagen, it is the mayor himself who sells the property of the Jewish Jakobsen family. Their rabbits and chickens bring in 62 Reichsmarks and 25 pfennigs. In Parchim, the auction is held in the so-called Jewish house at Buchholzallee 7. Those yet to be deported are forced to watch as the property of their fellow Jews is sold to the public by the local auctioneer Otto Heidenreich. Not only in Mecklenburg, but right across Germany, victims of the bombing have first priority at the auctions. With these tokens, people who'd suffered in the air raids could go to the auctions and buy what they needed. Although their furniture had been destroyed by the Anglo-American bombing, as they called it, the German public at least had the comfort of knowing that they could replace what they'd lost. The German people won't see these images until after the war is over. They are taken during the liberation of Auschwitz by the Soviet army. In the early months at Auschwitz, Jewish prisoners are gassed fully clothed. The survivors are instructed to undress the corpses very carefully. Their garments are required back home. The deportations were governed by a sense that everything had to be thoroughly utilized. Meaning that the enemy, from the anti-Semitic perspective, had to be completely utilized for the benefit of the German people. And that meant everything from the home, the furniture, servants and employees, to the things we see in these familiar pictures from Auschwitz, of people's hair, and spectacles and so on. The furniture looted from German Jews is no longer sufficient to meet the needs of the bombing victims. Spring 1942 marks the start of the so-called Möbelaktion, or furniture campaign. It involves German officials going from house to house in Western European cities such as Paris and Amsterdam, looking for the empty homes of Jews who have fled or been deported. In total, they clear out the contents of 69,512 apartments. These blurry images shot by an amateur filmmaker seem to be the only record of what took place.
On
the one hand, they were looting the vacant flats of people who had been deported, but particularly in the south of France, which wasn't occupied until later, officials also sought out the flats of potential candidates for expulsion. Removals companies would drive around with the German officials and identify people who hadn't yet been deported in order to seize their furniture. So seizing the furniture became the reason for the deportation, or the reason to hunt out Jews. The confiscation and sale of Jewish property is now coordinated by a special task force within the Nazi Party. Operations are run from this building in the Avenue d'Iéna in the center of Paris, the Dienststelle Westen. Furniture, household goods and clothing are brought to collection depots that spring up in various cities across France, Belgium and the Netherlands. These photographs were taken by an employee of the Dienststelle Westen. Jewish detainees are being made to sort the items that come in and mend damaged clothes. Here we see stolen radios being inspected and repaired. Even light bulbs undergo a short test to see if they work. The looted goods are packed in crates and dispatched by road, ship or railway to Germany. Between spring 1942 and summer 1944, 674 trains with 26,984 wagons are filled with confiscated Jewish property. A further 600 shiploads are also sent. The exact figures are unknown. The consignments are sent primarily to those areas most affected by the bombing. Berlin, located far to the east and not yet significantly damaged, receives 528 wagons. 703 wagons are sent to Rostock. Hamburg, huge parts of which lie in ruins, receives 2,699. Over 3,000 wagon loads go to Delmenhorst. The town of barely 60,000 inhabitants has seen relatively little bomb damage. From here, the illegally seized furniture will be sent on to other towns and cities in need. Yet many of the transport routes have been destroyed. The challenge is overwhelming. In these containers, you could see the homes of all these poor deported people from France, Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg. Everything is there, from tea strainers to cots. Clothes, shoes, pictures, even pianos. Everything they owned was inside. The small town is overwhelmed. There are simply too many things, from furniture to other everyday items, to distribute to the public. In the paperwork, there is one name that keeps appearing: Town Councillor Wilhelm Osthaus, a member of the Nazi Party since 1933. The council has been instructed not to auction the furniture and other household items, but simply to sell them as quickly as possible.
Councillor
Osthaus proved himself to be a resourceful and industrious sales manager. He found all kinds of places to store the items: empty hotels, restaurants and gyms, and he placed ads in the newspapers. Sometimes in a gym, sometimes in a restaurant, and sometimes in the workshop of local plumber Adolf Brinkmann. Showrooms for the confiscated goods appear all over the town.
Die Anzeigen sind sehr detailliert.
The ads are very specific, listing exactly what's on sale.
Was angeboten wird.
Wilhelm Osthaus even offers suggestions as to how the items might be used.
Diese eignen sich zur
These are suitable for furnishing a cellar used as an air raid shelter. Or with these things, one could build a rabbit hutch.
Kaninchenstall bauen.
In one single newspaper, the Delmenhorster Kreisblatt, over 50 ads appear in the space of a year and a half. There are so many items that the restriction on selling goods only to those affected by the bombing is soon lifted. Now anyone may buy them. The newspapers in neighboring towns give a similar impression. In Oldenburg, too, countless sales are reported.
Ja, das Zeug ist in
It all ended up in the living rooms and cupboards and kitchens and households of German citizens.
Haushalten deutscher Bürger geblieben. Ich denke, dass fast jeder wusste, was
I think everyone knew where these items had come from. Why do you think that?
weil sich das nachträglich
Because after the war, when the military government called on the population to register the items they had bought, or demanded they do so, it was clearly referred to as Jewish furniture.
ganz klar von Judenmöbel die Rede war.
Even the buyers themselves called it Jewish furniture.
selber von Judenmöbeln sprachen.
Early 1945. The war is over. The victors find a country in ruins. Has the story of the Jewish furniture and its unscrupulous profiteers come to an end? These images were shot in Leipzig. A glance at the figures points to an interesting development. Although Hans Clem's income during the war had been very healthy, in 1945, 1946 and 1947, his profits see yet another dramatic increase, to over 600,000 Reichsmarks.
Nachkriegszeiten sind immer gute Zeiten für Versteigerung.
The aftermath of war is always a good time for auctioneers,
Menschen ruiniert sind,
because a lot of people are destitute and they try to sell their possessions so as not to starve.
sich noch das Geld zu erwirtschaften, nicht zu verhungern. Da hat Clem natürlich,
And Clem made a decent profit from this, it has to be said.
muss man einfach nüchtern so sagen.
The refugees flooding in from the east include a number of Jews returning to Germany, survivors of the concentration and extermination camps. Among them is Freddie Kahn's father.
Natürlich waren die Menschen sehr.
Of course, people were surprised to see him. No one had really expected that the Jews would ever come back.
Die Juden wieder zurückkommen.
Harry Kahn does more than just come back. He rebuilds his cattle business and starts a family. Young Freddie is born in 1947.
Und mein Vater hat im KZ.
And my father came back from the concentration camp with a certain toughness, you might say.
Es war auch so, dass in manche Häuser rein.
He started going into people's houses and asking if he could have a look around.
Weiß ich nicht.
Or maybe he didn't ask, he just went inside.
Wenn man kein schlechtes.
And anyone who didn't have something to hide would say, "Take a look, there's nothing of yours here."
Ich habe mich auch beschäftigt.
I also started taking an interest in all these missing items, and I often asked myself where they'd ended up.
Gegenstände.
The items still exist. In fact, they're being used.
Nach dem Krieg hat der Pfarrer
After the war, the pastor called the musicians together. We were 2 violinists, 2 mandolin players, 2 guitarists, and a pianist.
2 Gitarren und Klavierspiele. Also
We played waltzes and other lovely pieces of music. We performed for the young people at their dances. There was no radio or anything like that.
Kein Radio, nichts, nicht? Und durch das Gegenspiel
And through playing violin, I became interested in playing the organ.
und deswegen steht
And it was popular,
Kurs,
very popular.
ganz hoch im Kurs.
Also,
And one day, out of the blue, I get a call from a Frau Pfeffer from Bisingen.
Frau Pfeffer aus Bisingen.
6 years ago, Frau Pfeffer returned the violin her mother had bought her to Herr Kahn.
Wenn sie gestimmt wäre, dann könnte ich Ihnen.
If it was in tune, I could play you something. But why didn't you decide to keep the violin?
Weil ich gesagt habe, jetzt bin ich 80.
Oh, because they told me I'm 80 years old now, and when I'm gone, they'll throw all these things out.
Und diese
And this violin should never be thrown out.
Nein.
No, I wanted to make sure it ended up somewhere.
Und dann
So I called Herr Kahn. and he came to collect it.
Und dann hat die Geige geholt.
Now it's back where it belongs.
Wieder nachkommen, wo sie gehört.
Stefanie, darf ich auch mal was fragen?
Stephanie, may I ask you something?
Gab's noch irgendwie andere
It's just occurred to me. Did you hear of other things taken from Jewish homes? Things that were particularly cherished by their new owners?
haben so etwas und so
Like your violin? No one talked about it in Bisingen.
mal drüber geredet und
Nee,
No, the woman from the party held the things out of the window and people could bid for them.
und dann konnte man das ersteigern. Und
Freddie Kahn has moved away from Bisingen. Yet he comes back often to visit the Jewish cemetery at the edge of the village. His parents are buried here.
Ist denn zu Ihrem Vater?
Didn't anyone ever come to your father over the years and say, "Look, here's something I bought at an auction"?
also
No, not that I can think of.
von nichts.
Yet returning an item is not always a simple matter. For years, Rolf Schmidt has been trying to find the original owner of his sideboard. On the back is a label that he thinks might provide a clue.
Ach, jetzt muss man gucken, da steht auch.
So, let's have a look. It's a bit wonky, I think. Okay. Can you see? It's okay, it's okay.
So. Okay.
Können Sie was lesen?
Can you read what it says?
Ich kann nichts lesen. Also ich.
No, not really.
Was mit Verstand-
Something about an auction, something about Mannheim. I already contacted the city archives in Mannheim and asked them if the bits I could read on the label meant anything to them. But they wrote back and said they didn't have any paperwork and didn't know where it could have come from.
sein könnte.
Rolf Schmidt's grandparents came from Hemsbach, around 60 kilometers north of Bruxelles. This is the sole remaining line of inquiry.
Gestern habe ich telefoniert mit Hemsbach.
Yesterday I spoke on the phone with someone in Hemsbach from the Synagogue Association.
Vereinigung
They said they were interested in the sideboard.
Angemeldet an diesem Schrank.
So maybe it will go back to Hemsbach, to where it comes from.
Und das wäre mir wirklich am
That's what I hope.
Vielleicht geht er zurück dort, wo er herkommt.
Perhaps it will be put on display in the small museum that's been set up in the synagogue.
Museum, das die
That's where I hope it ends up.
dort in der Synagoge eingerichtet hat. Das hätte ich vor. Das machen wir so. Das wäre mir am liebsten, wenn das passieren würde.
Daran zu
To remind people of everything that happened.
Ja,
Exactly. And for the sideboard to find its way home.
ja, das ist so.
I think that's important. In June 1948, fate catches up with Hans Clem. He is arrested, charged, and put on trial at Leipzig District Court. His defense, that he was merely following orders, is of little help to him in Soviet-occupied East Germany. His Nazi Party membership and his profiteering from Nazi crimes speak for themselves. On the 28th of March 1949, he is sentenced to 2.5 years in prison and receives a 10-year ban from working as an auctioneer.
Wir neigen ja heute dazu,
Today we would say he got what he deserved.
weil in diesem
And this serves as a warning to all of us.
steckt ja drin,
Think about what you get caught up in.
Leute, macht euch bewusst, woran ihr beteiligt seid.
However, Hans Clem's prison sentence proves to be an exception. The vast majority of auctioneers, bailiffs, and tax officials who took part in the theft of Jewish property are not prosecuted for their crimes, either in East or West Germany. The onus lies on the victims themselves to pursue complex and lengthy claims for compensation or restitution.
Das Problem bei dieser
The problem with these restitution claims was that the burden of proof lay with the victims.
ja, die
They had to prove what had been their property,
Die mussten beweisen, was ihnen gehört hat. Die hatten aber nicht.
but they didn't have, as one plaintiff said at the time, a suitcase with them in Auschwitz filled with receipts for their belongings.
Wie sollen sie beweisen?
So how could they prove what had been theirs?
Und wenn die
And if a claim ever did make it to court, there were witnesses. And these witnesses were oftentimes the bailiffs or tax officials themselves. They didn't testify as defendants, but rather as witnesses. And usually they claimed that the associated paperwork had been destroyed in the war. Well, I've got the paperwork right in front of me. It shows quite clearly the lists that these people made of all the items that were auctioned off. So in claiming the evidence had been destroyed, they were quite simply lying.
Und hat einfach gelogen.
Nor were those who purchased the items, whose names were often part of the detailed written records, ever called to account. And barely any of them willingly returned the items to their rightful owners.
Wir müssen von dem Szenario aus
It's safe to assume that many of our parents and grandparents still have certain items in their possession, and that these items were acquired illegally during the persecution of the Jews.
bei der Verfolgung der Juden diesen abgepresst worden sind.